Hey, hello, good afternoon, good morning. I'm very happy to be here on Cello Bello. It's new for me, it's the first time, and I've been following a lot of the activities of Cello Bello for many years, and I'm a fan of everything we can find there. It's really a treasure for the music and cello community. I'm here in Dublin, actually, in a quarantine, invited by the festival Cellissimo, which was supposed to happen a year ago, last spring. That was, of course, unfortunately cancelled. It was reprogrammed for the fall, and of course, again, cancelled. And the direction of the festival, who is was been created by a pianist, actually. That's a quite original thing. It's a cello festival invented, imagined by a wonderful pianist who is Fionnán Collins, great Irish pianist, and together with Anna Lardy, the directors of the festival, they put together an incredible program, and they found a way to maintain some activity. Even though there won't be any live concerts, there will be only stream concerts. Some of the guests will send their recitals, and one of the concerts that has to be physically organized in Ireland is the one that I'm actually doing on the opening night on next Wednesday, because I'm playing with the Irish Chamber Orchestra and conducting it. Therefore, I had to come here, and it's of course a wonderful obligation, except that I had to quarantine for 2 weeks in order to be able to actually do this concert. So this opening night will be on Wednesday with a program including Vivaldi Double Concerto, which I will be playing with Christopher Ellis, who is a wonderful young Irish cellist who was my student in Paris Conservatoire for a few years, and who is now in the US studying as well. And then I will be playing Haydn C major concerto and conducting Barber Adagio and Bartok Divertimento with the wonderful Irish Chamber Orchestra. This festival will also have a complete Bach suite series of 6 recitals. Every one of the performers will play one Bach suite together with various solo cello pieces. I will be doing one of them, the 5th suite, together with Duport, famous D major 8 study, and a wonderful piece by Enno Poppe, a German composer, who wrote this as a tribute to Boulez, called 12, and Dutilleux strophe sur le nom de Zara. And there will also be a complete cycle of Beethoven sonatas, the same way with different cellists, except with the same pianist. It will be Fionnán Collins playing together with every one of the guest cellists. There will also be master classes, one of them by Misha Maisky, other guests as well. And there is also a cello that has been built for that festival. That's quite an original thing that has been made especially for the occasion with Irish wood. So this will be the cello of the festival, and there will also be talks, and so I invite you to see in more detailed in a more detailed way the program on the website of Cellissimo Music for Galway, starting this week and for the next week, all the next week in Ireland. So I see some comments and some questions from Lee Collins. Hello everyone, thank you for your kind words. What are my thoughts regarding Bach Suite Marathon, 6 suites in 1 or 2 programs? That's a very interesting question, and I think Bach Suite you can always do them in many different ways. You can play one movement, you can play one suite, you can associate them in the way you want. It's always relevant anyway. There are different parameters for that question. Maybe maybe tastes, maybe some more personal relation to this music. But for the first time I did the complete suite, I did it in 2 concerts usually, 3 and 3. I was doing something like 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6. I also done 3 times 2 suites, and then I went for the whole cycle, and I actually appreciate quite a lot doing them now in the order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's an incredible intensity in doing it that way for me. It's not the easiest way probably, because going from 4 to 5 to 6 especially is quite challenging, although in many ways first suite is always as well very challenging, I find. So the difficulties are not necessarily where we think they are. So I guess everything is possible, but I value now quite a lot the order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there's an incredible progression. Another question from Louis Gaskins. Could you please share your thoughts on the D minor saraband regarding holding the bass line notes of full written values like drones, or releasing them sooner for lightness? Very interesting question. I think we have to be quite pragmatic in that sense. The question is to hear the bass line and to always follow the bass line. It's not always possible to hold it anyway. For instance, if you do anyway, you cannot hold it on chords. If you do you can hold this one, but you cannot hold this one. So anyway, holding them the same way for every chord is obviously not possible. So I think the way you project the sound, if you isolate the bass, you don't have actually to hold them all their full values to make them heard in their full values. If you think of the keyboard, for instance, it's quite obvious. So this is what I would think. On the other end, what I value is to always follow the bass line, and for that, in that regard, to feel the bass of the chords on the beats. Then that gives the feeling of the bass. If you anticipate them, it's usually lost, and that for me is more important than actually holding the full value, which is not possible. I hope this was a clear and helpful answer to what I try to do. Question for Kirill Karabits. Would you please share a bit on Rostropovich's personality, on his approach with his students? Oh, very good question as well. I was not actually a student of Rostropovich. I had the chance to play for him, and he was kind enough to attend the concert that I was doing and supported the beginning of my my work and my first concerts. So I think probably when he was a teacher back in the years in Soviet Union, in Moscow, he was known to spend entire days in his studio. He would come at the time he wanted. Students say that sometimes they had to wait for a long time, and then they would share a complete day or many hours playing and sharing things together. And I think at some point he would happily talk about anything, even some instrumental issues on the cello. And then later on, I think his approach was not so much about teaching the cello. He was very much on the piano, anyway, that he was always doing, because as you probably all know, he was an incredible pianist, and he could perform or accompany any piece of the cello repertoire. This I've seen. He memorized. I have great memories of him accompanying Prokofiev's Symphony Concertante on the piano. He was extremely impressive and telling stories about it and so on. So I think his teaching was very much on sharing his musical experience and stories with the composers, especially. He would speak a lot about the composers. He had the chance to work with, especially I remember him mentioning Britten, Prokofiev, Shostakovich a lot. And sometimes speaking more of instrumental things, but rarely. I remember once him being very insistent on certain details of the bow, not details by the way, basics of the bow, such as not having a tight thumb on the bow, this he would say. He would say, also I remember him saying that the sound was in the upper arm, that you had to feel the sound in the upper arm rather than in the bow hold, things like that. But he would not develop that. He was very keen on more developing on musical ideas and experience and characters. Susan Angela Dicker, can you give advice on how to develop the ability to use different bow speeds in order to phrase beautifully? Can you demonstrate a legato phrase and explain how you crafted it? My goodness, that's quite a challenge. Legato is a beautiful musical basic, and I think we should all cherish it and work on it very much. I saw recently a tweet from our colleague Stephen Isserlis saying, where is legato? Because he was complaining about the fact that maybe legato was not valued enough in some string players' approach. Maybe now we speak more about sometimes articulation with the bow, which is of course extremely important, but sometimes at the expense of legato. I would think that for myself and what I see with my students and how I try to help them working on the legato, the thing is never to connect the bow with the left hand. Like if you, I don't know, for instance, if you play Vocalist by Rachmaninoff, that kind of long legato stroke, never to play, not to feel the notes. That seems to be a very basic and simple thing, but I think it's extremely important to not feel the notes in the bow, but rather feel the bow in the left hand. Often what I see when the legato is being lost is because the left hand and the notes take over the line. And to feel the unity of a line on the bow and to feel it with the entire body, not with just part of the body. So to accompany the gesture so that notes are being linked properly. About the bow speeds, this is very difficult to speak about that out of any context. I would say that for me, the most basic and simple advice I could give, or what I try to do myself, is to think and to link the bow to what we do when we sing, actually. So that bow speed or the bow would be like air. If you don't change so much the air speed while singing, while changing the bow speed, if there is, like for instance, if you have a strong accent, if you play, if you play Prokofiev Symphony Concerto and you start, and there's a bit of accentuation at the beginning, of course, and maybe the beginning has a bit more speed than just having the same speed, but that goes with a lot with the fact that you give some impulse to the notes. So it would be maybe a little bit, even in a long, slow bow notes like that, there would be a little variation of speed at the beginning. Not too much, because otherwise, of course, you lose the capacity to sustain the note. So that's a simple example, but the variation of the bow speed would follow very much the variation of the air as we sing or play a wind instrument. But I would be very specific about trying to not link the bow speed to bow changes. That would be one of the things I really value in the approach of the bow. Change bow speed because you need and you feel like doing it for expressive purposes, not because you change bow or not because you have this or that difficulty with the left hand. To always be in the, not the control, but the sense and the sensitivity of bow speed. And to use bow as we need it. There's the famous Casals statement. You use bow because you need bow, not because you have bow. Question from Safa. Could you please recommend an Irish piece for beginners, intermediate cellists? You love Irish music. I do too, but I'm not a specialist. I'm sorry I cannot answer this question very well, but I'm sure you would find on the website of Cellissimo, there is I think there's a concert by Naomi Beryl with an Irish cellist who also sings, and I think she would be the person to ask, and she would have much more knowledge on that than I do. Question from Christian Gwandik. According to the French pedagogical tradition, can the 21 studies of Duport be comparable with Popper? What do you think of Gutzmacher's edition of these Duport studies? Actually, I don't know Gutzmacher's edition of these Duport studies, I'm sorry. But yes, I think it makes sense to compare Duport with Popper in a way, because they were both maybe not the greatest composer, but probably the greatest musicians possible. You can see from what Duport wrote also in his method, the incredible knowledge and musicality of his advices and modernity of it, where, for instance, he speaks about the ability to make the cello ring in a very even way, so building up the capacity to have an even sound, even though some notes have overtones, some notes don't have overtones, and so as we should compensate and be able to have homogeneous sound regardless of the weaker or stronger point of the cello. For instance, that is incredibly helpful, and that doesn't belong to any time in history. This is just a very universal advice and comment. And I would say also that they are comparable in the sense that they put in their music the music of their time. Duport, like Popper, obviously has a great knowledge on the great composers of his time. So you hear the music of his time in his studies. You hear, in a way, some Beethoven, Haydn, Mozart. So they're extremely helpful, even though they are not of the same musical level, of course, but they are not bad music at all, and they are extremely helpful as setting you in order to play classical repertoire and any repertoire. And in that sense, I would compare to Popper, who puts in his compositions Wagner, Brahms, Chopin, Liszt, all the great figures of the 19th century in a very inspired way. Like if you think of this study, that kind of study sounds very much like the Chopin revolutionary study. That's one example, but there are also excerpts, almost like quotation of Lohengrin in his studies. So in that regard, I would compare them as well. Question from Nelu Storienko. Hello, Nelu. Nelu is a wonderful cellist who studied with me in Paris, from Moldavia, and now in Vienna. He's asking a not related cello question. What are your thoughts on musical life post-corona, and what would be your advice to students who feel uncertain about the future? That's a very sensitive question, and thank you for asking that, dear Jan. First of all, I must say that what I see from my students and from young musicians, I find them incredibly brave in the way they've approached this extremely difficult year. I'm very proud of the way they've been working, never giving up, and even in some regards, I think taking music even with more depth and very seriously. This I'm very sensitive to. I've seen most of my students improve a lot this year, and give music its importance, the need that we have. Even though music is not regarded as an essential thing in many countries right now, we musicians and many music lovers know the importance of music, of course, and we measure it even more because we miss it. We miss the interaction with the audience. We miss seeing each other. We miss meeting. and speaking together and exchanging music. So that's the first thing. I have a lot of admiration for all the young musicians and the way that they don't give up and they keep their relation on music, even though I know, especially in some countries, some have great worries about the capacity to actually find work. So I think this builds a necessity for a very strong solidarity among musicians to really care for each other and try to build together institutions or support institutions that we have, or build new institutions, new festivals, why not new orchestras, and find the support. That means the musicians in many regards are responsible also, not only of course, but they have some responsibility in the fact that they have to fight for the place of music in society. And that would be my best advice, to not give up on the fact that we believe that music is important and is not important. It's more than that. It's our life. We cannot live without it. And I think we should be very strong with politicians, with administration, with whoever is in position to have some power on the musical life, at defending the place and the importance of music education, and to be convinced about it. Marcela Jimenez is asking, she's not asking, she's just saying hello, so hello Marcela. Richard Pally, could you please discuss bow changes and a good technique to hide or mask the changes? Thank you for your time. Thank you for your interesting question. Oh, it's an important thing. Recently I was talking about that with the great cellist and colleague Franz Helmersen. And he was telling me of a nice, interesting story of another great cellist, Jan Wang, asking Rostropovich about his incredible bow changes that we never heard them. They would be really wonderful, long and seamless bow change. And he was asking Rostropovich, how do you do that? And Rostropovich answered, because I want it. So first thing, will. Maybe that's a bit of an easy answer, because of course there's a bit more than that, but I think this is already, by asking the question, that means you are sensitive to it. You are sensitive to the fact that bow changes should be potentially hidden. So I think that has to do with when you change, I don't know if you see with the screen, but to feel flexibility in the hand, and to feel anticipation of the motion, meaning if I change the arm direction at the same time I'm changing bow, that is more stiff than if I anticipate. So that would be the first and the best advice I think I can give you, or what helps me in that regard, that the arm changes direction, or the body even changes direction before the bow. If the body changes direction with the bow, there is a possibility of a break, of a stop in the bow that we want to avoid. Rosio Lockwood, would you share a bit on how it was like working with Yehudi Menuhin and share more about his personality? That happened to me when I was quite young. Actually, it happened twice to me. I had the chance to work with him twice. First in the European Youth Orchestra, where we accompanied in Beethoven concerto for a tour, and then another time, the second time, for concerts that were organized in Moscow around Tchaikovsky trio with pianist Victoria Postnikova. So that was the end of Soviet Union and the beginning of Perestroika, for those who remember this moment when there was a little bit more freedom in Russia, and Menuhin wanted to come back at that time because he had difficulties going there in the 80s, or from the middle of the 70s to the 80s. He was more or less banned because he had taken public positions that didn't please the regime there. So in 87 he went back there, and in 89 we did the Tchaikovsky trio. So it was, of course, extremely intense for young musician, young musician that I was, to have the chance to play that music with him. I think, like usually when you play with great musicians, the striking thing is that it's both extremely inspiring, and at the same time you feel very free to have space to also express your personality or your ideas. That was the most impressive thing for me, because I was extremely young. I was 19 years old. He was already an old man. And in spite of that, there was no feeling of hierarchy. It was of course, I was extremely impressed and shy at first, but he was incredibly supportive and in the musical conversation. We rehearsed a lot, actually, for almost 2 weeks, every day, hours, not talking much about the music, more playing a lot. I think he needed to play a lot, especially in this time of his life. You know, he had some physical issue at the time with his right arm, and he needed to play a lot to maybe find back some of his comfort with the bow or with the violin, even though, in many regards, he was, of course, extremely, he knew everything he wanted to do with the music, but he loved spending time playing and getting as deep as possible into the content, the contrasts, the architecture of the piece. I was asking him a lot of questions, actually, because I was very curious about certain aspects. One of them, for me, was the rubato, because I was fascinated by his rubato, which had nothing to do with mannerism, which was extremely strongly related to the structure and to the depth of the expression of the music. And I was extremely curious to know how and why and how it was possible to have such a beautiful, both structured and free relation to the music. And I remember that he was actually giving very precise answers about that, very much inspired by UNESCO also approach, some of the 19th century approach, meaning that relating the freedom and the rubato a lot to the rhythm, to the pulse, but also to the harmonic functions of the phrase. You would take more time on notes of the chords. You will not take the same time on passing notes. You would lean on certain appoggiaturas, and so there was never any possibility of having a mechanical relation to the music. I think, to me, among the many, many, many things we could tell about the extraordinary musician that he was, that was the most inspiring and simple thing that I can share with you now. He was also saying that 20th century, 21st century would very much be about science, about counting, the capacity to measure things in a very precise way, whereas the 18th century, 19th century didn't have this. There was less sport, less way to measure things, to count how much time we would do these things or those things. And he would say that this scientific approach on music was the biggest difference that he had been seeing over the 20th century evolution of the relation to music. And he was obviously inheriting and transmitting another vision of the music, which had to do with a very human, sensitive, also very intellectual in many regards, but some kind of balanced approach between emotion, intellect, and of course physical approach of the instrument. Question from Travis Louis. How do we begin creating an artistic personality and style? What if we feel like we are unable to develop this style quicker than other students? That's a very touching question. My idea on that is that it doesn't have to do so much with will. I don't think that we want to be an artist. I don't think that we want to develop a personality. I think that everyone has a personality, by the way. Everyone is unique, so I wouldn't worry too much. I would rather worry or care about linking yourself as much as possible to the music you are playing, to the composers, to the character of the piece you are playing, or your composition if you want to compose yourself, and be confident about the fact that your personality will anyway express itself through the music. By the way, this is something that was very strong for me when I was with Menuhin precisely. I could tell that he was putting himself in a very transparent relation to the music in a way that, like if the music was going through him and express itself through him rather than by him, by will. There's a great quote of Fischer-Dieskau saying, Fischer-Dieskau, the great singers, speaking about the fact that great music making is not intentional. Could you explain or give Christian Wandik? Could you explain or give me some advice to study and develop better ricochet for Piatti Capriccio 5? I don't remember which one is the 5. This one? I don't remember which one. I'm sorry, I know them, but I don't know the numbers. But ricochet, I don't know, just let the bow free. Don't hold the bow too tight. If you are too tight, the bow becomes stiff. The bow jumps by itself. Actually, it's rather it requires more intention to put the bow on the string and have the bow stick to the string. If you don't do anything, you get that in Suite Italian. The bow jumps by itself. So I would say that when it doesn't jump, it's because you don't let it jump. Olman Ramirez, it's in French. He speaks about 500 concertos I performed in Perpignan and gave a masterclass a few years ago. Thank you. Nice to have your message. So Olman is asking about natural spiccato and the movement of the arm and fingers in relation to this bowing. So that's precisely spiccato is, I think we should make a difference between spiccato and sautiller. If I play certain speed, I let the bow jump. If I play spiccato, spiccato has to do with controlling each motion. It's, the famous Shevchik. That kind of. So that means that every motion is controlled, as opposed to the sautiller where you play à la corde and then you let the bow jump at some point, but it's basically the same motion. So I would say it's a relation between the motion is always the arm anyway, not blocking the arm when you do short stroke. Even though the bow jumps, it's still horizontal. So try to link the spiccato to the bowing you would do when you don't have the bow jumping. If I play this, there's a certain quantity of bow being used, a certain motion and direction of the arm, and then you let go. But it's basically the same. One of the things that is difficult on the spiccato is to control properly the up bow, not to have this uncontrolled up bow. So the down bow is easier, and the up bow is more difficult. So you have to adapt, have a certain flexibility of the arm in order to have a certain height of the arm. If the arm is too low, you cannot play the proper. You can play down bow. It's more difficult to play up bow. So not too high, but a little bit certain heights to control the up bow, and practice Shevchik, because it tells you to practice the up and then to have an even sound between up and down. That's one of the challenges of spiccato. Could you please teach us some tips for playing Bach suite, and especially the fourth suite? Thank you very much. This is Marie Carmen Polo Cabello. Hello, Marie Carmen. Fourth suite is not the easiest one because the key, E flat, is not an easy key because it has less overtone. Of course, if you play, you have a lot of ringing tone naturally with the open string. All suites are basically built on the natural resonance. This on G, this on D, and then this on C. So we say that the prelude are meant, originally the preludes are written to tune. So when you play a prelude, you check that your instrument is properly tuned. Nothing like that in the prelude of the fourth suite, which makes it much more difficult because you have less open string. So this is more difficult to have a proper sound on the E flat. So there has to be some contact, I suppose, on the string, not too light, because otherwise you don't. If you play this, you don't have to force anything on the E flat. You know, in order to have some depth, consistency of the sound, you have to play with a little bit more presence in the string. That would be the first thing. So this balance between this presence, but not forcing it. Let it ring, but feel that it doesn't come by itself, as opposed to if you do. That's easy, so to speak. That's not as easy to make it sound. Use as much as possible the natural ring of check the intonation with the open string, but that's in general, but especially in that suite. And then, of course, also have a less cello-related, in a way, approach of that suite, because this is nothing to do with the cello. It's more of a keyboard thing. It's in general in Bach, you have a lot of keyboard elements. If you play the, it sounds very much like, these preludes sound very much like the well-tempered clavier. And so the same way, I remember hearing fourth suite by great harpsichord player, Gustav Leonhardt. He thought that this suite was very much for the cembalo, which makes sense. And I think even though these are separate notes, it should feel whatever tempo we can play, slow or faster, that we can always discuss, of course, but the harmony units are extremely important, and I think they are helpful to not feel too much the notes. And simply practice E flat major scale or double stops and things like this. Could you, Luis Sena, could you please tell us about your thought on Haydn D major with regards to character, style, types of sound, and use of vibrato? Thank you so much, Rocco. That's an interesting question because, of course, this is a tricky one because everybody has these ideas and there are a lot of auditions, and some orchestra would like you to vibrate, some orchestra would like you not to vibrate. And the question is that we want to please everybody, and if you want to please everybody, I think you might end up pleasing nobody. So I think the first thing is to try to develop a relation to the character of this music. This is what you're asking, by the way, but apart from the style. Style is a very difficult question for me. I'm not a great fan of stylistic questions. I don't necessarily know what style is. We can know what taste is, maybe. Taste sometimes speaks to me better than style. And we know that style, the idea that we have of style is very much changing. I think if we have a certain idea, we tend to have a certain idea of Haydn style now that was different than some people had a few years ago. But although I think everybody is sincere in the fact that we try to play Haydn as close as possible to the character of the music. So I would try to think more of elements of the way it's composed. meaning the basic character of this, I would say that the first aspect of this is that it is cantabile, as opposed to, which is much less cantabile. So if you oppose, for instance, it's often helpful, I think, to find the character of a piece by comparing it to another one, meaning that it's not easy to know what it is, but it's easier to know what it is not. So if you think of the character of the first concerto and then you think of the character of the second concerto, you would find ideas, I think, which are quite inspiring. So cantabile. Cantabile for me is the most important characteristic of Haydn D major concerto. Very few contrasts between the first theme and the second theme. The second theme is also cantabile, except it's in a different register. The development, it's like a lamento almost. It's a very operatic thing. This, it's very much like an aria, like in an opera. So, of course, there are elements of more virtuoso, more, but even this, also this sings for me. So, that would be my main thing, my main advice about the character of Haydn D, that it is cantabile. And then, of course, some people would play it more sostenuto. Some maybe more lights, that we can always discuss, by the way. I think there's not only one way to play this. But either way, it is rather cantabile. I hope this is helpful. I'm not sure. I don't know. But I like to be helpful on Haydn D major because I know how stressful it is for most people to play it. But the main thing about it is that what I was saying at the beginning, don't try to please everybody and try to relate to the character of the music, to the harmony also. I see a lot of young colleagues who don't necessarily play the harmonical character. If we play this is the reverse in minor, so the change of character is extremely important. Vibrato, I would be quite natural about it, not force it, not vibrate in a Verdian operatic tenor way, but not necessarily. The non-vibrato is very helpful for practicing because it makes you practice the intonation, the quality of the sound, bow vibrato, so that you create vibration with the bow. I remember I had a chamber music teacher back in the years in Paris Conservatoire who said the best vibrato is the vibrato you don't notice. So I suppose in Haydn it's very helpful to think about that. If you start noticing it, it's too much. If you start noticing that there's no vibrato, that's not very nice either. So I would try to be as natural as possible. Wen Chen Li, can you discuss your thoughts about the rhythm and fugue of the Bach's Fifth Prelude and how does one control the sound when you play Baroque works with modern bow and cello? I think first of all it's quite interesting to play Bach suite with the Baroque bow. Whether you are going to do it later on, that's your choice, because you might feel better with a modern bow because the quality of the sound or the quality of your bow is better, and that we can endlessly discuss. But I think knowing how it feels with the Baroque bow is extremely helpful because some things are just simply much easier with the Baroque bow. The fact that it is usually lighter at the frog, and then you use the modern bow with that knowledge, and it is helpful. So yes, I would say practice Bach with a Baroque bow, whether you play it with a Baroque bow or not later on. For myself, I played sometimes a Baroque bow, sometimes not. It depends also on what I have, what the rest of the program is, how my cello reacts. Sometimes my cello likes the bow, sometimes my cello doesn't like this bow. So because of the setting, because of the weather, because of the acoustic. So I think you have to be quite pragmatic in that sense. But certainly the ease of playing Bach with a Baroque bow is extremely helpful, especially détaché. All these how can I say? Also, we've got strings, of course. Practice Bach, we've got strings with Baroque bow, and you will understand some of the bowings détaché. But I see sometimes poor quality of sound with modern bow metal strings and détaché. So maybe that's also something to consider. If you change the bow, if you change the string, that affects the quality of the sound, and that makes you play better certain articulation. I would not sacrifice the quality of the sound too much. Then about the fifth suite in particular, this is the only French suite à la française. So the characteristic is that there are, I'm not going to tune my cello with the G string. Please forgive me because it's a bit of a pain right now, but you can play. Sometimes I do it, but I think to have everything down bow can be a little bit heavy. I can have the same articulation, hooking, and I think it's good for the articulation and better for the phrasing, the global overall phrasing, to have a succession of down, up, and not everything down, which can sound quite heavy and not phrased. The main thing about the fact that it is a French suite is that there's solemnity in it. It's very dark, it's very dramatic, even tragic, I would say. So you have to feel that depth and to be consistent about rhythm. Whatever way you do them, you can do. You can then make them slower, more heavy, that we can of course discuss, but you cannot change from one. I think that's the mistake we often hear, like the dotted rhythm articulated, and then a legato or a different kind of rhythm. I think once you have to define a sort of stroke, a sort of rhythm, you have to stick to it. The same way. The same way in the Allemande, which relates to the prelude, I think, in some way, in the articulation. So I would try to be as consistent as possible. And about the fugue, some play it faster, some play it slower. That of course is very relative, but I think there's the pulse, but the fact that the motive doesn't necessarily relate to the accentuation of the bar, for me, is important. I wouldn't accentuate the bar, all of the bar, because that's sometimes what we hear, and I'm not a great fan of that. I think I would try to bring out the polyphony within the motive, and try to be also consistent with the stroke. If you do, because that's going to be all over the fugue the same stroke, sometimes with a lot of power, sometimes in a more intimate way, but it is still the same articulation, whether it is more or less intense. Marie-Carmen Polo-Cabello, what exercise do you do to warm up and also have a solid technique? Oh, warming up is a big question. Sometimes you cannot warm up, so I think maybe that's a bit of a provocative answer. Of course, we like to warm up and be all comfortable, but sometimes you cannot. And I think that's also something to consider when you speak about warming up. In order to be able to play and feel physically as well as possible with the cello, almost instantly. Sometimes it's, I like better to do a bit of gym. I do some push-ups, for instance, because it makes me feel a little bit more energetic, and the blood circulation is better, and that helps me to move my bow rather than doing lots of exercise. Or you go, I don't know, you go walk, or you go take some fresh air, and you feel better to play. And that warms up as well, because warming up is what? Is to have a good flow of circulation. The blood circulation makes you feel warm. Then some exercises are very good, like Kosman, that kind of thing. That's quite a quick way to have your fingers work. Bow distribution exercise, like, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, and then 8, and then 10, because it makes you control the bow speed in a quite relaxed way, and then that should be helpful. Some shifting exercise also can be good, such as that kind of exercises. Double stops in general. I was a student of Starker, and he taught us his famous organized method for string playing. This exercise, that kind of exercises where you have to develop all the possible relation between fingers within a position. That's very helpful. I hope that is basically what I think, what I do, and also not warm up if you don't need to. Sometimes we don't need to. Sometimes we feel good because we've been playing a lot the day before. We are in a good relation to the instrument, so don't waste your time warming up. Just play and practice. And sometimes we feel that we need more time to do open string, to do things that make us breathe correctly, to relay the bow to the breathing, to feel that when I go down bow, I try to exhale, for instance, not block the breath, which the breathing process, which usually makes us feel uncomfortable. Make sure that you breathe well. Sometimes also is more helpful than spending hours practicing. Malte Lauritz, could you share a bit about the cello and bow that you're playing, and how your thoughts on carbon fiber bows? I have the chance to play a wonderful cello by Matteo Goffriller, and that I've been playing for 15 years, almost 16 years. And so it's a cello I fell in love with, so I'm very, very happy to play it. It is not the easiest cello necessarily, as often Goffriller cello, they are moody. They are very sensitive to weather changes. The height of string, for instance, can change drastically. It's a very lively instrument, but I like that. And what I like most of all is what Casals was saying about Goffrillers versus Stradivarius, which of course are fantastic, but that maybe they follow better the personality of the person who's playing them. They tend to change. I mean, they have their personality. This instrument has a lot of personality, but I find that I can make a sound with it. It's not just I adapt to the instrument, although I have to, of course, but the instruments both give me a lot of idea to explore new sounds. At the same time, it's very responsive to my idea of sound. And one of the things I value about it also is that it has a lot of bass, depth in the bass, but also a very soprano sound. So it has a great range. Well, I think that's something I value, whatever cello we play, I think, to have a capacity to make bass sound, soprano sound, all sorts of colors of the instrument. But I feel that instrument helps me develop that. What do I think? And the bow is a modern bow by a French maker called Jean-Marc Poinhaleux, which I find extremely good. The only problem with Mr. Poinhaleux is that he made very few bows, unfortunately. But he's and I think he stopped making them, unfortunately. But he's a great bow maker. about carbon fiber bows, I don't have much idea about it. I tried once or twice. They seem to be mechanically extremely reliable. I wouldn't be sure about the sensitive quality kind of sound they produce, but I'm not a great specialist, and I know that they've improved a great deal, so why not? Grant Peters, how do you help your student working on a contemporary obscure piece of music? Where do you start? How do you approach it, especially if you can find any background information or recording? I think probably you mean some things that have a lot of maybe different kind of writing. So usually on contemporary pieces, composers are quite specific about the way they want. They usually explain. If it's not clear through the writing, you have notes saying. So that's the first thing to relate as much as possible on how it's written and the advices if you don't have any recording or any reference. So we would need to be specific about what piece exactly you are talking about, because it can be very different if you speak of Xenakis or Boulez or Berriot or some of these pieces which have been extremely far in making us create, produce new sounds, new patterns, new relation on the instruments. So usually this is what is difficult. For instance, if you play Messages Keys by Boulez, which is one of the greatest pieces of the last 50 years, I would say, but extremely difficult because it's moto perpetuo. That kind of note relation. This is a piece that took me a lot of time to learn, because you don't relate to usual harmony. So you have to be patient. You have to take your time. I remember that Rostropovich was extremely nervous when he had to play that piece, because he usually was learning pieces extremely quickly, because he was extremely talented and quick at understanding how things should be done. With Boulez, it was different, because you don't relate to the usual harmony structures and fingerings and organization that you have been practicing forever. So you have to be patient and spend time. I think that's the most important thing. But it can also be liberating, I think, to practice things with less background, less reference. So you find your own reference in a way, and your own interpretation of the things. In an era where we have so many recordings, so much knowledge about how possibly it should be played, it's interesting to relate on what you built in relation to the score on your own in a way. Mano, oh, that's very nice to hear from you. Shimoshima, hello from Japan. Mano is a wonderful young Japanese cellist who I've had the chance to meet in different master classes, and I'm very happy to see that she's there. Could you briefly discuss how to practice in order to create a variety of vibratos? Okay. As I said before, briefly, I think the vibration is a much bigger concept than just moving the left hand. It's first the bow. So if you do that, not changing the pressure, but just by making waves on the bow. That's something that Menuhin was teaching, that Enesco was teaching. Something that sometimes is being a bit lost, the concept of bow vibrato. I can have a looser sound or tighter sound. And that is not decided by the left hand, this is decided by the bow. So the first thing I would say is that be aware of the fact that if you play, I don't know, like, what is an example of a nice vibrato thing, like Schumann? I would say that we need a nice warm vibrato. But first, to adapt the bow, to adapt the vibrato to the bow. Not just play any sound and try to make it vibrate. Be aware first that the sound you want should be practiced potentially without vibrato, and then make sure that there is a harmony between the bow and the left hand. Then we can speak of more forearm vibrato, this more motion. that kind of motion that takes the whole forearm. Sometimes we feel more of the wrist vibrato, a bit tighter. So some changes in the position can help doing this. If I want a fast vibrato, I feel more flexibility from the wrist than if I want a bigger vibrato. I don't know if this is helpful. This is a really not easy topic. Some people have blocked motion, so you can practice that way. To feel that there is a certain amount of vibrato of movement, you can measure them. And then finally you fix it, but that's good for if you have difficulties controlling the speed, to do these rhythm exercises, not to be too tight also, because it shows you that there's a flexibility in the motion, the pressure, but not too much with the fingers, because it blocks the fingers. It blocks the fingers on the string, and it's too tight. Although sometimes vibrato should be tight and intense. I would relate again to the Rostropovich advice. You have to want it. You have to want fast or slow. Maybe another advice would be to be aware that sometimes there's a relation problem between the bow and the left hand that blocks the motion. So potentially make sure that you have the motion of the vibrato without the bow, and then add the bow, because sometimes there's a conflict between that direction and that direction. And the last thing I would say is about the direction of vibrato. This is explained very nicely by Leopold Mozart, Mozart's father. The vibrato is a motion from the hand to the scroll, not from the hand to the bridge. So vibrato doesn't fall that way. Vibrato is from the pitch going down. If you go up, it changes the pitch. So that also for me is helpful, because that motion is not very nice, and that motion feels better. If you feel the vibrato from the notes backwards, it is more comfortable and also more beautiful, I would find. Alexander Knopp, how has your perspective as a musician, an artist, changed throughout your career? That's a huge question. I would need to know on what. Some things don't change. The love for music doesn't change, for instance. In a way, it deepens. But perspective as a musician, artist, change throughout your career. Maybe you become more realistic, but that's not necessarily good. As a young musician, maybe you are more. I was extremely naive about certain aspect of the musical life, but I had no idea about anything. In a way, I was not raised in a musical family. I mean, there was music home, but I had no idea about the musical world as such. I just knew a few professional musicians, my teachers and people in Strasbourg, my hometown, where I was raised, the orchestra, but I was not in the musical business or world at all. The friends of my family, it was not a musical surrounding. So I had no idea really about jobs or career, not at all. I was really focused on the music, in a way, maybe in a naive way, but I was playing a lot. I was listening to music all the time. I was very passionate about that. I was going to the concert as much as I could. And then of course, music becomes more as it becomes your occupation, it also becomes the source of your incomes to make a living, to raise your children later on. And then of course that changes a little bit the perspective, because you have to be somewhat realistic about how to make a living with music, so and organize your life. Maybe this is the perspective which is a little bit changing. I see that with young musicians. Usually we become musicians because we love music, not necessarily because we think of jobs in relation to music, and then you discover the reality of the musical life and reality of jobs, what it is to, for instance, if you're a soloist, that was my dream, and I, in a way, achieved it, but I have no idea what it means to be away so much of the time, away from your family, so some aspect of the musical life can be extremely exciting, but also sometimes more difficult and painful in relation to your loved ones. So this is something that you cannot know before you have experienced. So I would say that is a reality that has changed, but otherwise I would say not too much change. You know, I remember reading an interview of Mstislav Richter, about how he felt about the music between when he was young and when he was not, when he was more advanced, which made me think of your question. And he said that most of the things that he felt and thought about the music, he never changed his opinion. And I'm exactly the same. I feel exactly, very modestly, I'm not Richter, but I feel that. I remember having extremely strong opinions and beliefs about character of certain pieces, certain sounds, certain rhythms, certain phrasing when I was a kid. And I feel as strong today. Maybe I'm a bit more tolerant about different ways of playing, because when you are young, you think, maybe I was thinking that if somebody doesn't do this and that in this piece, that was really weird and surprising to me. Now I am probably much more open-minded to very different approaches. But some of the deep down relation to music hasn't changed, and hopefully will not change. Okay, I think this is the end. This is the administrator, William, who tells me that this is the end of this nice chat with my colleagues, and some closing word. I was very happy to do that. It's a little bit weird not to have an actual conversation and not to see you all. So I hope that what I said was clear and helpful for some of you who asked wonderful and extremely deep and really important questions about music and cello. And I thank Cello Bello, which is again a wonderful initiative. His founder Paul Katz, and I wish you good luck in the coming years, and I mean weeks, months and year after this incredible difficult year that we have been through and still going through. And I hope that music will not only survive that, but help us all to build a better world and be in good communication with each other. Thank you.